Well, hello, avid readers of Christian fiction. Trisha Goyer here, and I'm so excited to have Lindsay Franklin today. So, Lindsay, welcome. And why don't you just start by telling us a little bit about yourself?
Thank you so much for having me today. I am super excited to be here. I am the author of the Weaver trilogy, and first book is The Story Peddler. Oh, thank you.
Right
Yep,
here.
there we go. There's book one. And I'm also an almost retired freelance editor. I'm retiring at the end of this year, so I'm
Are
very
you?
excited for that. Yes, to focus on my own books. So
Oh,
that's
good.
exciting. But I've been freelance editing for years and years. And I occasionally write nonfiction, but my first and truest love is young adult fantasy.
Yeah, I love this. Okay, so I mentioned before I went to Realm Makers this summer, and I told Scott there who runs it, Scott Miner, I'm like, I would love to interview all your award winners. So here we are. So you're the one that won this summer. I have it on my audiobook. So hold on, let me pull it up because I'm actually listening to it right now. So here's the audio for The Story Raider, and it
Yay.
won for, it was the best audiobook. Is that what it won
Yes.
for? Okay.
Mm-hmm.
But The Story Peddler, you see, there's a nice little, beautiful award winning there too. So this one, the year prior, and I am loving these books so much. So my husband was asking me like, "What is that?" Because I mean, doesn't that look intriguing right there? And so I've talked about Story Peddler is like a peasant girl who goes around to earn money with this mean old lady, and she tells stories, but they come out of her hands, and there's colors, and so then they actually form into something like tangible. And he's like, that sounds so cool, because my husband loves like fantasy and science fiction. All my kids, all my adult kids are all into that, and I'm the one like, let's watch a historical fiction or historical movie, or let's read these books. And I'm gone over to their side now because I love these
Yay.
so much. Yes. So tell us how you got the idea for The Story Peddler, and then you could talk about the rest of the series too.
Awesome. Well, this was the third book actually that my agent and I pitched. So I had been trying to break into the Christian market for a while, for years, and I had become agented on a different fantasy manuscript, and we made the rounds with that. It got all kinds of wonderful rejections. Everybody was like, "We love it," but no, it was one of those things. So I'm like, "Cool." And so my agent had me write something totally different, which was YA contemporary, and I loved that. We got another round of glorious rejections on that. So I was sitting in a workshop at Mount Hermon, and trying to
Mount Hermon, yes.
right, Mount Hermon is the best. So I'm sitting there listening to an acquisitions editor from a major Christian house giving a workshop that was really about like the back end kind of what her job is, explaining that to authors, especially newbie authors who are trying to break in and don't know about publishing. And she was telling us how she can really relate to our like terror in pitching to her at the conference. She said she really has to do the same exact thing to pub board. She goes in with these manuscripts that she's really passionate about, that select few that she has not rejected. She has to go in and pitch them basically to pub board, and she's got like a minute to sell them on this idea and sell the sales team on the idea and everything. And she said, that's, so we're the same. And she's like, that's what I do at the end of the day. I peddle your stories. I'm a story peddler. And I was like, that's a cool phrase.
That is a cool phrase.
So after that, it was just such a throwaway for her. She just said this really cool thing and then moved right on to, explaining what pub board is and all of that. So I went off. If you've never been to Mount Hermon, it's like this camp situated in the redwoods.
It's so beautiful. There's like trails and cabins, and it's for those that aren't familiar, it's a writers conference, and I'm actually keynoting there next end of March.
Awesome.
So yes, I'll put the link in the little notes right here, or the comments. But yeah, it's a beautiful, beautiful campus. So.
Gorgeous. And my career really started there. I met my agent there. I met my future editor there, both of them. It was like the epicenter really of like the start of my career. But after that workshop was over, I took my little laptop and went off into the redwoods and sat down and just started writing. I was like, in my fantasy brain, what would a story peddler be? What would that look like? And so I wrote what is essentially the published first chapter in the story Peddler was basically what I wrote after that
Wow.
workshop. And everything else in the story has changed. Like, it went through a lot of revisions, and
Yeah.
a major one where I scrapped all my secondary characters and started over. So it went through a lot, but that first chapter is really, the bones of it are the same as what I wrote. So that was where it all started. And it just kind of grew from that concept, that one little weird throwaway phrase that struck me so hard that the acquisitions editor used. And I've never told her that that's what
you should tell her.
I should send her an email.
Yeah. I was at a retreat. So I'm from Books and Such agency, and we had a treat with Andrea Doring she's at Revell now, but she was speaking, and she's like, if you have anything with orphan trains, prairie romance, and mail order brides, that will always sell. And so I'm like, I'm going to write a book. And so it has Orphan Trains, Mail Order Bride, and a Prairie Romance all in one book. Awesome. And of course it sold, but it was so funny because like those little things, and she was just joking, like throwing that out there, and you never know. Like,
our creative brains, just like take hold and go, okay, I can do that. I can tell that story.
Totally do that. So the first line, I'm going to read it first, and Tanwin is the main character. For the first line, or first two lines, says, "Colored ribbons of light poured from my fingers. One strand broke free and soared above the crowd's head, glowing golden in the afternoon sun." You're like, light from her fingers? Like, what's going on? So, and she is such a super fun character because she's spunky. And she says her mind, and just as you think like she's going to say something, like something completely different will come out of her mouth, and you're like, I do not believe you just said that right now. And so she is so great. She's such a fun character. So I bet you just had a lot of fun with her, because she's not a boring character that's going to like cower. She's just going to do what she wants to do.
She is totally based on my daughter.
Oh, really?
Yes, who is now 13. But at the time I wrote that very first chapter, she was, I think, 5. She was little. And so sometimes when people are like, I can't believe Tanwin made that choice, or, oh my goodness, she's so immature, I'm like, well, I based her on a 5-year-old at first, so okay, But also she's young, she's 17, and we all know that, having been teens, or if you're raising teens are impulsive sometimes and make some choices. So I tried to write her like an actual teen, but one who had been given a lot of responsibility in her life because she's essentially an orphan.
Yeah, absolutely. I have 4 teenage girls in my house right now, and then an 11-year-old boy who's so tired of sisters. He's like, adopt a boy so we can have another boy. I'm like, we're done adopting kids. But yeah, so I understand those little girls and their attitudes.
Yes.
And,
yep.
Yeah. So
but they're so fun too. So much fun. And it was such a joy to kind of look at my daughter that way as a character and how I'm going to infuse her essence into this character. It was a lot of fun because I think our instinct, especially when we're first starting out writing fiction, is to put so much of ourselves, especially into our point of view characters. And I certainly have characters like that. But with Tanwin, I was really intentional. No, I'm not writing myself. I'm writing that kid because she's hilarious and I love her.
Oh, that is so cool. I love that you did that. Okay, so explain the world of the weavers. So you have story weavers, and you have color weavers?
Color masters.
Color masters. I knew that wasn't right. So, and then I just came in book 2 about the sculptors, which were, what are they called?
Stone shapers.
Stone shapers. Yeah. So explain kind of this world that you set it in, because it's so fascinating. So some of it just reminds me of what you'd expect in medieval times with kings and queens and peasants. But then there's this mystical, amazing world of all these people with these amazing talents.
So when I was sitting down in the Redwoods thinking about, what is a story peddler and what does that look like? And what if that was kind of the magic element in this story? And by magic, of course, I mean supernatural, not like magic spells. I always have to qualify that because I'm not talking about witchcraft magic. I'm talking about supernatural gifts. Okay. Yes. So, I started to kind of just build a magic system, as we call it in the fantasy writer realm, build a magic system around that. And I come from a family of artists and musicians and performers and singers and dancers. And it's so prevalent throughout my entire family on both sides. And so I started imagining all these different art forms as magic essentially, or as a supernatural gift, because, you know, like my nephew, who is a teen now, but when he was tiny, he would just sit down and sketch the most beautiful like 3D dinosaurs and stuff when he's like 3 or 4 years old. Like he's born with that gift, and it comes from my dad, who was a professional illustrator. You know, and so the idea that these gifts are kind of inborn to a degree, and yes, you hone your craft and you learn how to harness it and how to use it. I mean, that's just straight from the real world as far as I'm concerned. Yeah. Because some people just, I mean, my sister plays a bazillion different instruments, and it just kind of comes naturally to her. So that was sort of how I built out the magic system, was just imagining different art forms as tangible supernatural gifts that you could see in progress as they were, you know, happening.
I love that so much. And I love, like, you could totally look back. Like, I was a little kid. I grew up in a non-reading home, and I just would go to the library and get tons of books. Like, summer reading program, I was the one that always won. And I mean, looking back now, I'm like, there should have been no reason why I'd be drawn to books, because no one else in my home read. Now, when I found my biological dad, like, his side of the family is artists and authors and pastors, like all these things. But at the time, there was like no people in my life putting that in me. And I just did a book with Todd Tillman, who won The Voice 2020. He won the 18th season of The Voice, and his parents were like, he was 18 months old and he was humming along, carrying a tune with his hums. He couldn't even talk, and all the songs he could hum along and he would sway. And it's like, you see these little kids, like you're saying, and you see these gifts in them. And what I love as the books are going along, I mean, there's mention of the creator, and there's mention of these gifts from the creator. And I don't want to give away too much, but it just got to the point where it's like the gifts, like you can imagine what man can do with these gifts, but what if the creator is using the gifts through you? And I'm like, okay, this is getting so cool. So I love that you talk about the spiritual element, and I do want to say, for people that like, they don't want their kids reading that kind of stuff. Well, this is like, the spiritual element is toward, you can tell it's towards God, and it's towards his gifts towards us. And so explain a little bit about that.
Yeah, so that's always the question, I think, and probably in other genres it's the same, but I know my speculative fiction, you know, colleagues, we sit around, you know, who are believers, we sit around and talk about like, how overt do we make the parallels in our you know, fictional worlds that we're creating, because it is a little different than when you're writing in the real world and you've or your story is set in the real world. I mean, we're all writing in the real world, I hope, but when the story is set in the real world, you know, how you're going to incorporate faith is a little bit more straightforward, perhaps. And for fantasy authors, it's like, well, how do we approach that? How do we want to do it? And I don't know that there's really one right answer. There's just what's right for that story and what's right for that creator, lowercase c, not the big capital C, but you know, in that moment, whatever God is calling us to, who he's calling us to write for. So, you know, with this one, it's probably more covert than my other fiction that I've written in the past. The ones that got all the great rejections, those were a lot more overt with the spiritual elements. And this one, it's really like in there, but it's kind of woven in this way that I felt like the Lord was telling me, it's going to be very clear, especially for people who share my worldview. And one of my street team members was so awesome. When she read her arc of Story Peddler, she like went into my street team Facebook group and started like posting all of these scripture references. They're tied in with Story Peddler, and they're not like, it's not like a Bible study kind of like, I don't even know if like you have like a whole Bible study thing in the back, how sometimes they have like discussion questions that are very like ties in very you know, distinctly with the spiritual elements. But she picked up on all of like my worldview and my heart that just kind of spills in like under the radar. Yes. So yeah, I intentionally went a little bit more covert because I felt like that was what this story needed, and what the Lord told me to do with this one. So I kind of revisit, revisit that question with every story that I write, because every story needs something a little bit different, I feel like.
Absolutely. Like you said, if someone who shares your worldview will just like, oh, I could totally, when they say the creator, I know what they're talking about,
Yep.
or, all these things. Yeah. And the light overcoming darkness. I mean, all the things are in there. And so, but someone like you could hand this to someone that would not be interested in Christian fiction. They would love the story and the messages are going to come. Like your messages from your heart are going to come through to theirs, and they might just start asking questions of themselves or might be drawn to that and not even understand why. And that's what I love about these books and about what you're doing, because like I said, I could hand this to someone that I would never pick up a Christian book or even one of my books that are too Christiany for them, and they would probably love the story because it's in there but not like in your face.
Yeah, definitely more on the covert side. But I really, if you visited the secular YA shelves at Barnes and Noble or any bookstore, there's certainly a lot of great fiction out there. But it's pretty dark. There's a lot of dark stuff out there, and I'm absolutely not opposed to like dealing with darker themes. I mean, that's the world we live in. We live in a broken world. Like I'm there for that. Always, going to be willing to talk about those things. And I do talk about some darker things in the Weaver trilogy. But always with the idea of, hope woven in to that, and where our hope comes from, and the possibility of redemption, all of those things. Like you can read a lot of general market stuff and that's completely absent. And so I felt like it was important to have some kind of alternative. And I know a lot of people are writing in this space too, a lot of, fellow believers, especially for teens where, they're going to be walking into the YA section and pulling some of these books that may be very well written, but don't have that hope in them. They don't have that light. And the teen years are hard enough as it is. Like, we don't need to be like dousing our young people with just this like hopeless worldview. It's sad.
Yeah, and that's what they see. That's what their friends are reading, and they often don't think there's other alternatives there. When we've adopted 7 kids, but 4 of them were teenage girls. So, 11-year-old, 2 13-year-olds, and a 15-year-old who'd been reading all kinds of stuff that I would not have approved of, but they got stuff from their school library, from foster parents' homes, or wherever. So then I'm like, here, read this, try this. And they're like, but we would go to the library and they would get a stack of books and like, okay. I'm like, well, let me look at them. Sure enough, either from the first page, or I would just open like 3/4 in the back. I'm like, nope, we're not going to have this. This isn't appropriate. And I would be just putting one after another on. And there was very, very few from the secular world that I'd be like, okay, I think this is going to be okay. But I mean, it's so obvious. Like if you open the book or open in the middle of the book, I mean, there'd be scenes like 3/4 and I'm like, oh, I don't even want to read this. And it's in the young adult fiction section. And so pretty soon they started reading some of Lisa Ton Bergren's. They loved Jenny Jones. And so different ones I was able to get them. And now that's what they like to read. But at the beginning, they're like, I don't want to read that. That's so dumb. And so I know they're going to love these. We're going to have them fighting. I hid them until we did this interview because I would not see them again. But just to say that it's so good to know that there's fiction well written, that's interesting, that I could hand them over and know that even though they're like, I'm not going to like this, pretty soon they're like, now they know to trust me, and they know that there's other stuff to read. But my daughter, even like, she was really struggling with some things. She's 18 now. One of my daughters, she's 18 now. And she's like, I just decided not to read any junk. I'm just going to read my Bible and my Christian fiction books. And I'm like, yay, for you. I know this, but I'm so glad that she's coming around realizing like when she reads that junk, she just feels horrible. And there's just that icky presence that when you read that stuff. And so you get light and hope and joy when you read this other fiction.
It's that worldview, we can't help but have our worldview kind of spill into what we write. And I think that's true for, for every writer. So, can you separate the art from the artist? Yes, to a point, but if somebody is living their life in this really dark, hopeless place, that's going to spill into their fiction. Yeah.
And you can't hide it. Like You
No.
can't hide it. Yeah, I remember there's a season where people were thinking it'd be easier to publish in the Christian market. Just throw some prayers in there. And no, I mean, you could just tell right away this book is not from a point of view from someone who this is their world and they love God and all those things. So I
Yeah.
love that there's alternatives. Okay, so the first one is the story Peddler, which is so good. And I'm halfway through the story Raider. And the third one, I've already forgot the name, even though
The
you just
story Hunter. Actually, I have it. I'll hold it up.
Oh, good. Okay. Yay, it's the story Hunter. Yes. And look at these covers. I mean, the covers are so awesome.
Kirk DuPont's.
Yes.
Kirk DuPont's designed those. He's just amazing.
Yeah. Yeah, he is so great. And yeah, and he won for some of the designs are this year at Enclave, I think, or not Enclave. At Realm Makers, he won for the cover art. So
yes, I think Dust won cover art this year. Yep. And so he did that one. He's always so well represented in the cover design category for finalists. He always has at least one book up there. The Story Hunter was also some of his art that finaled this year. So he's amazing.
That's awesome. Yeah, and he's done like 3 or 4 of my covers too. When I got to talking to him, he's like, "I know your name," and he started listing off the books that he did. I didn't even know. I'm like, "Oh, cool, okay." So that's pretty fun. All right, cool. This is one question everyone wants to know. So, are you working on something next, or what are your plans?
I am. Story Hunter released May of 2020. So that was an interesting launch, like right after COVID hit. And it was like, this is going to be interesting. But it really was like my lowest stress launch, which is amazing. But anyway, I needed some space to kind of not be on deadline, because I had been on deadline since 2016, because while I was doing the Weaver trilogy, I was also writing 2 devotional books for Zondervan for young adults. And so I had 5 books, like on deadline, kind of at the same time. And I was just so tired. Like, I need some space to be creative. And I had this idea kicking around in my head for like 2 years. And it's kind of a reworking of that original fantasy manuscript that I got agented on, but got all those lovely rejections. I was like, I'm going to reimagine this, this story in a totally different context. So I have been working on that ever so slowly. But outline's done. So I'm starting to pick up steam with that. And I'm really excited. I'm excited to be writing again and to feel creative again, because I don't know if you've ever had this experience, probably, at when you've been just under the wire for so long that you get this feeling like, am I ever going to have another story idea again? Like, am I ever going to be able to be creative or write again? Because your brain just gets really, really tired. But I'm feeling creative again. So yay.
I know there's sometimes I'm like, I don't even care about these characters anymore. I want to do something else. But then it comes back and you're like excited about it again.
Yeah, it's just a moment. It's just like a moment where you're like, oh. I always go through that at least a few times when I'm writing, during the launch, afterwards, where I look at the book and I'm like, I hate this. What have I written? I absolutely hate this, but it passes.
I think every author is that way, though. Every author is like, I don't care about these people. I don't want to talk about them again. I don't want to think about them again.
Yep.
Yeah, and then it's so fun if you put it away a while. I wrote biblical fiction, which I never thought I would write biblical fiction. I wrote Miriam. It released, I turned it in October of last year. So I turned it in just a little over a year ago. It released like in February or March, like really quick, as with Guidepost. And I haven't looked at it since. Well, we're doing ancient history in our homeschool. I'm like, I'm going to read Miriam aloud to them because it's ancient history, because we're talking about, they're learning about the different tribes and different, anyway. So I'm reading it. I'm like, this is so good. I love it. But it is so funny. Like, you have to put it away, because at the end, I'm like, I don't know what I turned in. Like, I don't even know if I like it. I hope it's biblically accurate, which it is. But it is so funny. Like, for a while, you're like,
Yeah, your brain just gets tired, and you get tired of looking at, I think, and maybe readers do know, especially if they're, if they follow authors on social media and such, they kind of have a window into our process. But I think that the casual readers out there don't maybe understand how many times we read our own manuscripts and how often and we have to go through and revisions and copy edits and just all of that stuff. And like by the time my books release, I don't ever want to read them again. And I still have not read any of the Weaver books after publication. I haven't, and I will. I know I'll go back someday and read them. But because as I was releasing one, like the release day for Story Peddler was my due date for my draft of Story Raider.
Oh my goodness!
And release date for Raider was my Hunter draft was due. So I was just like one after the other, and so I just, once they released, I was like, no, I just can't. I can't go back, but I will eventually. Maybe I'll try listening to the audiobooks. That's what
they're so good. Well, I'll say they're just really good. So I'm enjoying them. They did a really good job. And I love all the characters. I love Carla. It's really wonderful. I mean, you just have so many great characters in there. And I mean, they're just very different personalities. So that's what I like. Is like they're so different from each other that and I think that's just the sign also of a good writer. Someone can say something and you're going to know who it is by what they said and the way they said it.
Oh, awesome.
Even if you don't, I mean, of course you have Braxet or Morissette or whatever, right. But I love that because you could tell like these are completely unique. And the on the audiobooks, the narrator did a really good job because
she's amazing. I've listened to snippets, and that's how my daughter actually, because my daughter is a huge audiobook reader, that's how she consumes most of her fiction. She's a podcast listener, like she is that audio person. I'm trying to get more into it, but well, Trisha and I were talking before we went live. My auditory processing is not the best. I'm very visual, and so words on the page is usually best for me. But my daughter is really into audio, so she listened to the whole trilogy, and I would hear little snippets, and I'm like, Pam is amazing. She's out there like doing, like not just one male voice, because I have different points of view. I have a lot of characters. It's fantasy, but she's out there like doing Tanwin's voice, doing not just one or two male characters, but like 12 different male characters. Yeah. She's got like a different voice for each of them. She's incredible.
Yeah, she is. Yeah, and it's so interesting to watch. My kids will be like, "What are you listening to? What is that?" They're interested. Like, I want to listen to that too. I don't know. That might be a good thing for homeschool too. We could listen to these, which I was going to mention. So if your kids like the Chronicles of Narnia or Andrew Peterson's Wing Feather series, this would be books you can totally hand over to them and know that they'll love it. But also, as an adult, I'm really loving these books, so don't feel like, oh, these are just going to be for young adults, because they're not. I mean, they're just characters that are fun. I mean, almost Princess Bridey sometimes, in the fun character interactions and stuff. Reminds me a little bit of The Princess Bride, which is one of our favorite movies. So
love that movie.
So if you love that kind of stuff, you will love this.
There's actually a fairly direct Princess Bride reference. I think it's in Raider. You're not there yet, though. You'll get there. So you'll have to hunt for it and let me know when you find it.
I will. I'll be like, I found it. Yeah.
I love that movie.
Yes, I love that movie too. It's like one of our favorites. That one, the other funny one is Elf. We really love Elf.
I love Elf too.
And I just told the kids the other day, it's about Elf season. It's time to start watching Elf again. And we probably watch it like 3 or 4 times every Christmas season.
Same.
I know. I'm always like, oh, these people that are, these wonderful Christmas movie classics, and we're like, Elf.
We're right there with you. And that's another thing, is finding movies where you can watch them with your teens and your teens are enjoying them, but it's not like there aren't any cringy moments where you have to like fast forward through. I just love that when filmmakers find that spot where it's like, it's not a kid's movie. My teens can love it. My husband and I can watch with them. And it's just, I absolutely love that. So I think that's kind of the space I'm trying to write in.
Yeah, I think you did a good job.
Good. Yeah.
Because there's the humor in there that's kind of fun, like some of the stuff Tanwin says. I'm like, oh my goodness, I can't believe you said that. She cracks me up. But it's the plot's interesting. There's all these weavers, and so you did a good job of matching that where it's fun, but it's super interesting. And it's so funny because I was getting ready for church and I was listening, and then the kids were like, "We need to borrow a brush. Need to do some." I'm like, I'd play and stop and play and stop. And I'm like, they just need to leave me alone. I'm like, wait, okay. It's Sunday morning. We're getting ready for church. I probably should put the audiobook up for now.
That's great.
Well, I am so excited, and I'm excited that you're going to be digging more into this next book, because I know as soon as book 3 is going to be, I'm down. I'm going to be like, okay, Lindsay, where's some more for me to read? So I'll be excited to hear.
Well,
hopefully
thank you.
that'll find a wonderful home. So
I hope so too. The new series has a Wizard of Oz tie-in. So, and those Oz books were, I was totally that kid getting lost in the library when, when I was little, and the Oz books, I think that I like hunted around all of the public libraries in San Diego County where I'm from, because there's like 13 or 14 Oz books. And so I was like, I must find them all. So that was a very influential series in my growing up years. So I'm really excited to kind of tie some of that into my fiction.
Oh, that is so cool. I was Little House on the Prairie. That was me, Little House on the Prairie. And we went and just saw the actual place of the Little House on the Prairie in Kansas.
Nice.
This couple months ago with my kids, my little kids. I was going up to speak, and I'm like, we're driving, and we're going 3 hours out of our way to go and see the Little House. But we were up, it was by Topeka, and I didn't realize we were driving, and I'm the one that pulls over at every historical like landmark and stuff. So we just been looking at a museum and an Oregon Trail place, and then I said, there's a Wizard of Oz museum, and I was like getting ready because they're like, we are hungry, and I'm like, okay, we're not going to stop at this museum. But next time I'm up there, I can't remember what town it's in, but there was a Wizard of Oz museum up there.
Awesome.
So that's pretty fun in Kansas. So if you're ever in Kansas,
my dad is from Kansas, so I have been a couple of times.
My grandpa's from Kansas.
Awesome.
So. Yeah, we're related. No, I don't just.
Maybe.
Oh, well, Lindsay, thank you so much. Where can people go to find more information about you and these amazing books? Hold it up again.
Awesome. Yay. Thank you. So you can always find out about me and my books at my website. That is lindsayafranklin.com. And Lindsay is spelled with an A too. So there's all those A's in my name. And the books are available Amazon. You can go to Enclave Publishing's website as well and find all of the places where the books are available. But my website's a good hub to find me if you want to chat with me more, get to know me a little more. Instagram is my favorite place to hang out.
Awesome. All right. Well, thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.